In today's video, titled From 32 AD to 2032 AD, Passover to the Fig Tree Generation, we are going to examine three unique topics that will beautifully demonstrate how you and I know that we are that close to the rapture. You see, in section 1 of this video, we're going to dive into the 32 AD Wednesday crucifixion. We're going to take a look at the two calendars, the math and history of the Gregorian and Julian calendar, in order to precisely pinpoint this date. And in our second topic, we're going to uniquely identify an error discovered in the 33 AD Passover date, but through this lens will help set up a beautiful teaching moment for both you and I in how to determine a Passover for any given year. We're going to take a look at God's celestial science to do that. Now, really more so section 1, the 32 AD aspect, will help us to set up section 3, which is to revisit this 84-year prophecy found in Luke chapter 2, and why there is some compelling evidence the 84-year prophecy marks the true fig tree generation. Oh, I think you're really going to like this part, as it puts science and Bible prophecy in the same classroom. In fact, teaching us that Daniel's 70th week begins in 2025 with Christ's return in 2032. But before both of those two events, the rapture of the body of Christ. And so, just to state the conclusion, that all this evidence within this video will help to provide just how close you and I are to the rapture, but with solid evidence. Scientific too. And so, with all that being said, welcome back to Supernatural by Design. My name is Jarrett, and I appreciate you joining me today. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I'm a little late on a video because this past weekend was my birthday weekend. And so, what a wonderful way to celebrate that by going to different national parks here in the state of New Mexico. And so just a few pictures from my birthday trip. Here's a picture of myself and my mom. We went to Carlsbad Caverns. As you can see, she's doing a whole lot better. And I thank you for your prayers and support. But while we were there, we got to go into the cavern 750 feet below ground. We saw some of God's beautiful geological masterpieces. Really an incredible time. And then from there, we went to White Sands National Park. And I gotta tell you, that was absolutely beautiful. You can see nothing but white sand, technically gypsum, but as far as the eye can see, it was incredible. But nonetheless, just want to share some pictures with you. But before we begin this video today, if you can do me a huge favor, hit the like button, the share button, the comment button, the subscribe button, all the buttons that you can hit. Because by doing so, will certainly help to support this channel, and I greatly appreciate that. Thank you for your support, and thank you for watching these videos. God bless, I love you, and let's begin. Alright, so coming back to our table of contents slide. So as mentioned previously, we're going to go through these three topics. Again, with the intent to fully understand and appreciate God's celestial signs. They're pinpoint accurate. I can't understate that. And by examining His beautiful design, we will shore up why 32 AD is pivotal for accurate end times Bible prophecy. Right? It's kind of like that old saying, you can't understand the future unless you understand the past first. And thereby section 1 and 2 will give us that historical anchor, right? And that's why in section 3, wow, man, I can't wait to get to section 3. But the 84-year prophecy, a true fig tree generation, is going to blow you away. Now, before we dive into the details of section 1, let me just kind of preface this real quick regarding how this topic came to be. You see, I've had many comments asking for further clarification on a Wednesday crucifixion in 32 AD. In fact, recently I even had a conversation with Brother Aaron over at God a Minute, and so I realized, like, hey, maybe we should dive into the mathematics here. Let's really pull that out. I glossed over it in the two previous videos over this topic, but I always appreciate those who ask for more clarifying answers. So we're going to dive into the mathematics and history of the Gregorian and Julian calendars. And so moreover, this first section is for you all based on some really good questions. And to that point, will help all of us know just how close we are to the end because we understand the beginning. And so now, to begin section 1, I want to play for you this video. It's me typing into the Google search bar, what day was 4/14/32 AD? Sorry, I apologize for the pixelation on this video. But what I want you to pay attention to is that I asked the question, what day was 4/14? And it pops out Wednesday, April 16th, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because I'm asking it, what day was the 14th, and yet it pops out the 16th. It's weird. Or is it? Hence, why we need to discuss the history and mathematics of the Julian versus the Gregorian calendar. And so, we want to discuss the truth behind their origins, the discrepancies, and anti-Semitism. You'll be surprised, the change here, using the Gregorian calendar, is rooted in anti-Semitism. That's not good. It's not good. We'll see why here in a second. All right, so a little bit of history here for our 32 AD, the math for Wednesday. You see, in 1582, Pope Gregory the 8th removed 10 days from the calendar to correct the Julian calendar and align it with the solar year. This adjustment was necessary because the Julian calendar had accumulated extra days over time. In fact, the change was made to bring the vernal equinox back to March 21st, to the date it was in 325 AD. In fact, we'll see why that particular year here in just a minute. In addition, the change also adjusted the timing of Easter so it better coincided with spring. And so what Pope Gregory did was remove 10 days by skipping ahead 10 days to make up for the extra days that had been accrued under the Julian calendar, noting that the Julian calendar had been in existence for over 40 years before Christ came onto the scene. And so what Pope Gregory VIII did was in October of 1582, on Thursday night, October 4th, when it went over into midnight, which would have been Friday the 5th, however, instead would be Friday, October 15th, skipping forward 10 days. And so that is the history of how 10 days were removed. But I also want you to know while we're here, because it will become important later, is that the days of the week never changed. It remained a Friday, but will also play a major part in our significance of error. In fact, to that point, let me explain. You see, the vernal equinox, what we know as today, the spring equinox, during the last 2,000 years is approximately 365.2424 days. The decimal aspect is a huge part of this whole thing. But nonetheless, you see, the average length of the Julian year is 365.25 days. And these two values differ between the Julian and the vernal equinox or Gregorian year by a value of 0.0076 days, which is roughly 11 minutes. And so this margin of error compounds when we're talking about hundreds of years or thousands of years, especially in our case for 32 AD. And so from the year 1 AD, to the year of 1582 when the calendar was changed, the calendar has actually drifted off the vernal equinox year by taking the difference of 1582 and 1 AD, 1,581 years, and we multiply that by this difference of 11 minutes every year, actually equals 12.02 days. And so the question is, why didn't Pope Gregory remove 12 days instead of just 10 days? Well, it turns out it has to do with the First Council of Nicaea, which was held in modern-day Iznik, Turkey, in the year 325 AD. Remember that was that year I was talking about earlier? You see, because one of the matters settled by this council was the method for determining the date of Easter, which should occur around the vernal equinox, so as to make it independent, make it independent of the Jewish calendar. You see, there was an anti-Semitic undertone that was driving this change. And if you want to be accurate to describe a Jewish Messiah, it's probably a bad idea. And so, Pope Gregory's rhyme and reason You see, from the year 325 AD of the Council of Nicaea to the year of 1582 when he made the change, that difference in years is 1,257 years. And we multiply that by the difference between the two calendars of 0.0076, it equals 9.55 days. So 10 days were removed in an attempt to restore the date of the vernal equinox to about the same date of the year at which it had occurred at the time of the Council of Nicaea. And to that point, this is why Easter is celebrated every year when it is. But nonetheless, I want to turn to this side, which is a conversion table used by the Nautical Almanac offices of the UK and the United States, which was originally published in 1961. In fact, you can find it in Wikipedia. Now, I forgot the exact topic title. I'll screenshot it and put it in the video here. But this is so you can go look it up for yourself. But nonetheless, what we're going to do is we're going to use this conversion table to prove what we just recapped historically, because it documents it here in this almanac. For example, we're going to talk about the 10 days versus 12 days, this 2-day discrepancy. We're going to talk about the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And we're going to see this change made in 1582 using this almanac. It's very helpful. A second corroborating source for what we just discussed. And so on the agenda, item number 1, as you can see highlighted in yellow, here is our 10 days versus 12 days, a 2-day discrepancy that was introduced as error when Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar. Now, I'm going to pull this up so you can see it, but I want you to note that there was a 2-day offset between 1000 BC and 100 AD, which 32 AD, the year Christ was crucified, would fall into that gap. Hence, we have a 2-day discrepancy. Notwithstanding a 2-day of the week discrepancy. We'll discover that here a little bit more later. But nonetheless, this almanac continues, and I actually had to screenshot it and put it onto this slide. But I want you to note that for our item number 2, the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD as a reference point that Pope Gregory used when introducing the Gregorian calendar, the almanac confirms that. You see how we went from negative 2-day difference from that previous slide? Now we're at 0 days difference. Why? Because that was the reference point that Pope Gregory made the change from. All right, next slide. And so, as you can see, by the time we get to 1582, down there I've highlighted red, or really outlined it red, there is the 10-day difference. And so moreover, this almanac confirms the history that we just discussed. Now turn with me to this slide, because the main point of error is topic 1, the 10 days versus 12 days. There's a 2-day discrepancy. And just as we'd seen before, that in 32 AD, April 14th, according to the Gregorian, was on a Monday. But if we're using the Julian, it was a Wednesday. That's our 2-day discrepancy. Okay, are you with me so far? Okay, great. Because now it's going to get a little bit more complicated, but we're going to walk through this step by step. And the reason why I'm adding this aspect to the video is because I want you to do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. But I want to explain some of the nuances you're going to come across, and this will help explain what you're going to see. And to that point, help you to ask better questions when investigating these kind of things. Because as you'll see, you'll have to be very precise in the questions that you're searching on. But nonetheless, off the deep end here, if I turn to this slide, you see April 14th on the Gregorian is a Monday. However, its equivalent, technically, is April 16th on the Julian, which is a Wednesday. So let me turn to this slide. Because remember, we just saw on the almanac that 32 AD, in fact, all these years, 30 AD to 34 AD, there's a 2-day discrepancy. And so you see right here where it says Julian date on this top row was March 3rd. Well, its Gregorian equivalent would be March 1st, which is exactly what we see, a minus 2-day difference. And so in the case of 32 AD, April 16th minus 2 days is the equivalent of April 14th on the Gregorian. And so now turn with me to this slide. Remember, when Pope Gregory made those 10 days removed, he kept it to a Friday. But because there is this 2-day offset, we also have a 2-day offset for the day of the week. Right, because if I'm talking about the Gregorian day of the week of October 15th being a Friday, then to say October 15th on the Julian, because it's 2 days ahead, that would have been a Sunday. And so we already have an issue if we're using the same exact calendar date to pinpoint the day of the week. Does that make sense? If not, check this out. Because now, understanding this a little bit more clearly and pertaining to our 32 AD example, you see, you have to be precise in which 14th are you asking about. Are you asking about April 14th on the Gregorian, or are you asking about April 14th on the Julian? You see, looking at the left pair, if we're asking about April 14th on the Gregorian, it was a Wednesday, and its equivalent on the Julian calendar would actually be April 16th. And to that point, remember earlier when I started out with that Google search video? This is why it generates that response. It makes sense now, doesn't it? But nonetheless, coming back, and conversely, on the other side, if I'm asking about April 12th on the Gregorian, it's a Monday. However, its Julian equivalent, April 14th, well, that would be a Monday. And this is why we get the discrepancy, saints, with some results producing an April 14th Monday, because the lens, whether you realize it or not, that is being asked through is through the Julian calendar, which makes sense because that is the calendar that would apply to the time of Christ, as it was in use during that time. Remember, the Gregorian wasn't introduced until 1582. And if you're looking at April 14th on the Julian, then yes, it was a Monday. However, if we're looking at April 14th through the lens of the Gregorian calendar, then it was a Wednesday. And why is that important? Well, you see, when it comes to the lunar eclipse aspect, for example, if you're using stellarium or lunar eclipse dates provided by NASA, then it's good to have the same consistency with regards to the calendar you're using, because it creates a common reference for independent people to find the exact same eclipse. Right? I wouldn't want to have to worry if you're telling me, hey, Jarrett, go look up an eclipse on this particular date, and I have to worry if you're talking about the Gregorian or the Julian calendar. No, if we're both on agreement, hey, let's just use the Gregorian calendar as our reference frame, then when I go look it up, I can find it. However, when it comes to the day of the week, that's when we have to be precise about which calendar we're talking about, because the day of the week is a different question than what date did an eclipse take place. In fact, that brings me to my next slide. You see, this chart that you are looking at is all the data from NASA on their lunar eclipses, and they're using Gregorian dates. And so therefore, April 14th would have been a Wednesday. But the other key aspect, even besides the day of the week, is what type of lunar eclipse it was. You see, only a total lunar eclipse is considered a blood eclipse. And I'm referring to the right column under the eclipse type. Right? A P is partial, it's yellow. An N is a penumbral, and it's a glossy white. Only the blood of Christ sanctifies us. Right? Not yellow or glossy white. And so it's this key aspect of what kind of eclipse that God is using is probably more critical. I say probably. It is more critical to understand that aspect than the day of the week. The day of the week definitely helps, and it solidifies this whole thing. But it's the eclipse type that's paramount. And as we've seen before, that particular eclipse on 4/14 of 32 AD occurred in a constellation that's linked with purchase or redemption. And again, it's Christ's blood that provides that payment. And for more on this particular aspect, definitely check out the Lamb of God prophecy video if you haven't seen it already, because it's a lot more in depth than what I'm just kind of outlining here, as the Passover lamb is critical to really appreciate this blood eclipse. Also, always verify the eclipse type. I've seen certain websites that will say, well, 31 AD has to be it because there was a blood eclipse. However, when you actually go and back check what kind of eclipse type, it wasn't. Same with 33 or even 30 AD. I've seen various arguments, but none of them are actually consistent with the evidence. And we never want to force what we're finding into a pattern. We let the evidence speak for itself. But again, this is just to solidify the importance of a blood eclipse, right? It's more rare, statistically improbable, to actually have that occur than the other ones. But nonetheless, for this 32 AD math for Wednesday, let's briefly recap what we've discussed so far. We've discussed that there is a 10-day versus 12-day difference, or a 2-day discrepancy, with the introduction of the Gregorian calendar. That causes problems. Secondly, that this was all referenced back to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and that it was in 1582 that this 10-day change was made. In addition, that this change was to move away from the Jewish calendar. Bad idea. We also saw that which day of the week for the 14th depends on which calendar you mean. In addition, that for 32 AD, doubling down, tripling down, that it was a Wednesday. And point number 7, that only a Passover with a total lunar eclipse, blood eclipse, fits the prophecy. Okay, good. So let me circle back here real quick because I want to take a deeper dive and show you some tips and tricks for home research. Asking the question, is there an easy way to determine for ourselves any day of the week for a particular Julian or Gregorian date? Well, there is. Thank goodness, because this will make your own research easy. And I want to introduce you to Zeller's congruence algorithm. You see, it's a method for calculating the day of the week using mathematics. You see, Zeller's congruence is an algorithm devised by Christian Zeller in the 19th century to calculate the day of the week for any Julian or Gregorian calendar date. It can be considered to be based on the conversion between a Julian day and the calendar date. And so the screen that you're looking at now is that equation, which looks rather daunting. You can take a screenshot of it to really understand what the math, or I should say the variables outlined in this equation represent. But from a high level, basically you plug in your date and Zeller's congruence outputs the day of the week, which is represented by capital D in this equation, all the way on the left. And so moreover, you plug in your date. For our example, let's say 414 or 32 AD. The lowercase d is where we would plug in 14. Since we're talking about April, the 4th month, that's where we would plug that into M. And then 32 AD, you actually have two measurements here with respect to the century that you are referring to through the variables y and c. And it also takes into account the leap year as well. Hence why you see y and c divided by 4. Anyways, you do all that plug and chug, and the number that you get within the parentheses here is then mod 7. And it's this mod 7 operation that will force your result into one of these 7 positions. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each one is assigned a day of the week. And so if your result for big D is 4, then you know that the day of the week is Wednesday. Now, the reason why I walk you through this equation is because there's a shortcut route, which is to simply look up in Google Zeller's congruence calculator. However, I wanted to walk you through the math so you understand why you're receiving the output that you're receiving. And so moreover, if you just type into Google search, you'll come up with many websites that when you plug in the 14th day, the 4th month of 32 AD will tell you that it was a Wednesday. So that's one website. Here's a second website. I know it's kind of small. Let me kind of zoom this little section up here. You see, 414 of 32 AD was a Wednesday. And again, here's another Zeller's congruence, but this one's a little bit more detailed in that it tells you, yes, the 14th on the Gregorian and is Julian equivalent of the 16th. And it also tells you that the day of the week for that date was a Wednesday. So there are 3 examples of using the Zeller congruence calculator as a tool. It's a great tool for home research. And again, all these prove that 4/14/32 AD is a Wednesday mathematically, and that's key. Now, I have found this particular method to be the most reliable. In contrast, if you use ChatGPT or some sort of AI, don't just take the first result you get, because I've discovered that if you ask it the same question twice, then you are likely to get two different results. In fact, if I could show you a funny example, here is a response that I got from ChatGPT when I originally asked this question. Granted, I don't have a screenshot here, but I'm making my way there. Anyways, it had told me that April 14th was a Friday. And then I re-asked the question the exact same way I asked it, a different instance. And the response was interesting. I love this. It said, however, if some sources suggest April 14th, 32 AD was a Monday in the Gregorian calendar, they might be using a different method of conversion, perhaps interpolating using modern software. What in the world does that mean? Wait, I thought this was AI. Maybe this is 1949 AI. My bad. I apologize. I might be using modern software. But anyways, it then recalculated it at the final answer and then says, so if you're referencing April 14th, 32 AD in a historical context, Wednesday, Julian, is the correct answer. And so, moreover, if you're kind of reading this here, I mean, it gives you three different answers. It finalizes to April 14th, 32 AD, but you see there's a Friday and a Monday, but then it's like, you know what, in a historical context, it's Wednesday. So moreover, from this example here, you got to be careful with AI. It does work for different things, but in this instance, it really kind of struggles. So that's why I showed you the manual way of doing it through Zeller's congruence. But moreover, Zeller's congruence calculator is a great tool to use. So I highly suggest that for any kind of research you want to do, if you're trying to be precise about the day of the week, use the Zeller's congruence. And again, the reason why this is important is because if we're trying to be precise about the day of the week, then there's only 1 year that meets that criteria when looking at the Julian calendar. Not 30 AD, because that would have been a Sunday. Not 31 AD, because that would have been a Friday. 33 AD would have been a Tuesday, and 34 AD would have been a Saturday. Only 32 AD marks a Wednesday. Now, I'm going to end the video right here because we are running a little long. So definitely make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. You have to see this 84-year prophecy marking the true fig tree generation. It's a fascinating detail that we're going to add. But nonetheless, I love y'all. God bless. And thank you for all my birthday wishes. And I'll see you in part 2.